Three young Palestinian men are receiving medical care after being shot in Burlington, Vermont on Saturday evening. The students were walking on Prospect Street while visiting a relative in Burlington for Thanksgiving when they were, quote, confronted by a white man with a handgun, according to a release from the Burlington Police Department. The three 20-year-old men were identified as Hisham Arwatani, Kinan Abdelhamid, and Tassin Ahmed, all of whom study at three different universities in the United States, including Brown, Haverford, and Trinity. According to the police department, two of the three students were wearing keffiyehs, traditional Palestinian scarves, and the students collectively were speaking Arabic. Two of the victims are in stable condition, while one has sustained more serious injuries, the release says.
A suspect was arrested on Sunday in connection with the shooting. 48-year-old Jason J. Eaton was detained Sunday afternoon near the scene in Burlington. While authorities say there's no additional information to suggest the suspect's motive, the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee said, quote, "We have reason to believe that the shooting was motivated by the three being Arab." The University of Vermont says it has, quote, "no indication the shooting is connected to the school and that it is saddened by the incident." The FBI said it is, quote, "prepared to investigate what took place." So we're at a time where there's a rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in the United States. And I really see situations like this, where you have a 48-year-old man, Jason Eaton, in Burlington, Vermont, very far away from Israel and Palestine, who feels threatened, who feels angry, who feels aggressive, that he needs to commit an act of violence against three men who are walking to Thanksgiving dinner. And I think this is a consequence of the rhetoric that we have on mainstream news, on conversations, on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, about what's going on in the Middle East. And they say things like, all of the Palestinians that are living in Gaza should leave, and if they don't leave, they are Hamas. You have the Israeli state, who is an ally of the United States, pushing rhetoric like all Palestinians are guilty. I think that kind of rhetoric leads to consequences like this. I think the Muslim boy also being killed in Chicago is the direct result of the kind of violent rhetoric, the dehumanizing rhetoric that we have just on cable news. It's absurd.
So I, wish for a speedy recovery for the three victims. This individual should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, should be in prison for doing this. I don't know what his motivation is, and I don't particularly care, because regardless of what the motivation was, you can't shoot at people, and he should face the consequences of that. I'm perfectly willing to believe it was anti-Arab or anti-Islamic bias. That, again, perfectly plausible to me. And if they want to have a hate crimes investigation, fine. I'm not particularly, again, I don't really care. I would prosecute people, again, for the fullest extent to the law for attempted murder, regardless of what their motivation is. So his mother says, the mother of the alleged perpetrator says that he's mentally ill, which is so often the case in these shootings. So, look, I don't know if he's mentally ill and the flavor of his illness has taken on racial bias and he decided to do this. I'm a little suspect of the dangerous rhetoric explanation. There isn't a whole lot of ideologically motivated violence in this country, frankly, given how heated our rhetoric is. Very seldomly do people stab or shoot each other because they hate each other for their views or their ideology, or because of some broader conflict going on in the world. Usually, they far more often attack people for domestic violence or workplace violence, or for crime or gang violence or mental illness. So I'm real reticent about blaming rhetoric, because then a lot of people will swoop in if you start blaming rhetoric and saying, well, what do we do about rhetoric? Should the First Amendment have limits? How many times do we have to have this conversation where someone starts proposing censorship in response to concerns about heated rhetoric? Look, I think it would behoove everyone to cool it with their rhetoric. Obviously, I don't support likening all the Palestinians to Hamas. In fact, I think a lot of the Palestinians are victims of Hamas, a regime that they have not voted for, most of them, an autocratic regime that has not held elections. So I don't condone any of that kind of rhetoric anyway, but I think we ought to be careful about casually associating it with real-world violence. I mean, particularly time and time again, we see that these are mentally ill people, and that seems to be the most relevant factor for a lot of these killings, frankly. Attempted killings, I should say.
We read the manifestos of so many people who have done racially targeted mass shootings. The shooter in Buffalo wrote a manifesto in which a lot of what Tucker Carlson was espousing on Tucker Carlson tonight about the need to have more white births and that the country was being taken over by people of various races, that the makeup of the population was changing. This kind of racial anxieties has been sown on cable news networks like Fox. And I don't think it needs to be the kind of situation where a law is proposed or rather Congress decides, we need to limit some kind of free speech about what's going on in conflicts abroad so that we don't have these actions of violence. No. But if someone is a news reporter and they are fed this very one-sided rhetoric where when Palestinians are killed in an attack by Israel, it's not reported as Palestinians die in explosion. It's reported as an Israeli airstrike killed Palestinians. When you have Hamas going and killing many Israelis on October 7th, that should be reported within the context of a conflict that has lasted hundreds of years instead of framing the situation as Palestinians are extremely dangerous, that they hate Jews, that they want people in Israel to die, and Israel is our ally. I really think the necessary context is a responsibility of journalists, that you need to hear out both sides and report on the truth, not parrot the sentiments of an extremely right-wing genocidal regime in Israel. And I think a lot of that kind of responsibility went out the window when the FCC ruled that there's no more Fairness Act. The Fairness Act, which was something that Reagan pushed to be overturned, was no longer at play in news, and news could simply be propaganda. I think a lot of the responsibility in journalism went out the window, and so this is not the kind of thing that's resolved by law. It's something that's resolved in the court of public opinion. And I think everyone, when you see the kind of Islamophobic violence taking place, one child stabbed, 4 people shot, including a woman who was a doctor in Texas, I think now we have to consider, okay, what has contributed to these sentiments growing in the United States? And I think a huge part of that is the kind of conversations that are had in the public arena and on mainstream news.
I mean, but it's just, there were 250 murders in D.C. this year. It's our highest total in a long time. It dwarfs last year. Doesn't get talked about nationally. The reasons for it and whatever solutions aren't being analyzed is 250 people. And no one seems to care because of ideological reasons. It's garden variety crime, it's mental illness, it's poverty, it's gang violence, and for some reason that's not interesting to people in the same way that presumed or alleged ideologically motivated violence. The tiny sliver of crime that falls into this category is exhaustively discussed at a national level because you can try to blame Tucker Carlson or Israel or when it happens with a deranged left identified person as it does now, that you can blame pro-choicers, or you can blame climate extreme or anti-green movement people. It seems like displacement, and I think the responsibility lies on the people who commit the crimes, as is in this case. So we disagree on that, and also I would not be happy to see a return to the fairness doctrine, which was stipulating that media companies had to give equal time to the other side, which is actually kind of myopic even to think about now, because I mean we're outside the side. I want news that is outside the sides, the narrow confines of Republican versus Democrat, which isn't even, sometimes that's not even different. That's a consensus, and for the government to be the one deciding, well, this is the contrasting perspective we want you to bring. That seems like an absolute recipe for disaster. Actually, we have a healthier media environment now with no fairness doctrine, right? We have social media, and we have all these media companies all over the spectrum, right, left, et cetera. I mean, you were just talking about in another segment how well the young left perspective on Israel-Palestine, how it's thriving on social media. I mean, giving people the tools to talk and present the news on their own has, to my mind, led to a lot of ideological diversity in the way the news is presented, more so than the government trying to say, okay, well, we'll spend this much time on this subject from this direction, and then this much time on this subject from another direction. I mean, that was not, to my mind, that was not the way I want things done.
Yeah, I don't think that it's a binary of the media environment we have today and then the pre-fairness doctrine overturned media environment, right? I think the fairness doctrine didn't forbid independent journalists from doing their work. The fairness doctrine was something that was regulated by the FCC, which applies to the kind of news corporations that are now not held to any sort of regulatory, pressure to ensure that their reporting is true, to ensure that their reporting is not misleading, to ensure that their reporting is not misinformation. I think there needs to be some more regulation for what people consume believing to be news when it's not news. We need some regulation to determine, okay, how are we going to ensure that what people are getting is the truth? And it could be the truth with an opinion. It could be the truth with a particular kind of bias, but it still needs to be true. And it still needs to tell a story that doesn't intentionally leave out facts to paint a particular narrative. I think that there needs to be some kind of role that the government has in regulating this, whether it be the kind of community notes approach, where when you're telling a story and you're leaving out certain facts, you can say, this story was told with solely reporting from the Israeli government or the IDF or the Netanyahu regime in the Biden presidency. I think there needs to be some way for people to be able to filter out the news that they're getting in a way that is fair, and it might not be what the fairness doctrine said, but it can't be absolutely nothing at all, where the media landscape becomes the Wild West that is mostly controlled by billionaires like Rupert Murdoch, who can control multiple papers and determine what the narrative is on very many issues. We have a monopoly of the press now. I don't think it's much better. I don't think independent journalists have as much power as the media monopoly that we have on cable and nightly news. And so we have a lot of stories being run on the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. But to my knowledge, no one who is Jewish has been stabbed or shot after October 7th. And so there's an outsized focus on anti-Semitism. When one child has been stabbed and killed, a woman doctor has been shot, and now 3 young people going to Thanksgiving dinner have been shot as well. One of them is in critical condition. And so I really think we need more of a focus on what's really going on in the country and not having so many stories left out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the accountability is exactly what we're doing right now. Exactly what you're doing, challenging things you read and see in different media outlets. I think, I'm not for media outlets getting things wrong. I just think investing the government to have some kind of the FCC to control or to try to decide what is misinformation, I'd be more horrified of that than anything else. And in fact, we've seen a lot of for instance, the bad moderation decisions made by social media companies dictated to them precisely by misinformation czars, people who got it more wrong than anyone else. So I'm for a hands-off, let everyone flourish, let people criticize each other, and I think we're lucky to be living in the best environment for independent media, frankly, that has ever existed, and maybe can be even better. Maybe 10, 20 years from now, we'll talk about how this was a very censored or stifled environment compared to what the future holds. I hope that's the case. But we will continue to report on all this. Let us know what you think about these subjects, and we'll have more Rising in just a minute.